Keith Wright is a former professional football player who played as a defensive tackle. He played college football at the University of Missouri and entered the National Football League in 2003 when he was selected in the 6th round of the draft by the Houston Texans. Although his time in the league was limited, he spent periods with multiple teams, including the Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Arizona Cardinals, and Detroit Lions. His professional football career was brief and concluded several years before he became involved in a high-profile criminal case in Sacramento County. After his football career ended, Keith Wright returned to California. In 2011, law enforcement in Sacramento County investigated a series of residential robberies that shared several common elements. According to court records and news reports, the incidents typically involved a suspect unlawfully entering homes and taking personal property, such as electronics, jewelry, and financial items. Authorities stated that many of the victims were women, and in one of the cases, a victim reported being assaulted. Investigators treated the series of crimes as related due to similarities in method and timing. The incidents took place in residential areas of Sacramento County and were often reported during early morning hours. According to law enforcement, the suspect appeared to follow a consistent pattern, which helped investigators identify potential links between the cases. At first, detectives had limited information. However, the investigation advanced through the collection of surveillance footage, physical evidence, and witness statements. In multiple cases, victims provided similar descriptions of the suspect's behavior and appearance, which supported the theory that the crimes were connected. Investigators eventually identified Keith Wright as a suspect. According to police reports and court proceedings, evidence recovered during the investigation, including items reported stolen, played a key role. Digital and forensic evidence also contributed to the case against him. Wright had prior contact with law enforcement, although not involving the types of offenses for which he was later convicted. During the investigation, law enforcement obtained a search warrant for Keith Wright's residence and vehicle. According to court records and news reports, officers recovered items believed to have been taken during several of the reported incidents. Investigators also submitted forensic evidence, including DNA for analysis, which further supported the case. In 2012, Wright stood trial in Sacramento County, facing 19 felony charges. These included multiple counts of robbery, burglary, false imprisonment, and other related offenses. Prosecutors presented evidence suggesting that the incidents shared a pattern and argued that Wright had targeted individuals in residential settings. Testimony from multiple victims was presented in court, helping to establish a consistent narrative across the reported events. Wright entered a plea of not guilty, and his legal defense questioned whether the evidence was sufficient to directly link him to each specific incident. After hearing the evidence, the jury found Wright guilty on all charges. In November 2012, Keith Wright was sentenced in Sacramento County Superior Court to 234 years and 8 months in California State Prison. The sentence included multiple consecutive terms related to the felony charges on which he was convicted. Based on the total length of the sentence, he is not eligible for parole and is expected to remain in custody for the rest of his life. Wright is currently incarcerated in a California state facility. The case received media attention at the time of sentencing, in part due to the severity of the charges and his former association with professional football. Coverage primarily focused on the legal outcome and his background as a former NFL player. The case led to some public conversation about the challenges professional athletes may face after their careers end. At the time of the offenses, Keith Wright had been out of the NFL for several years. While some coverage highlighted the difficulties athletes can encounter without long-term contracts, no direct connection was established between his football background and the crimes. During sentencing, individuals involved in the case provided statements in court. Some spoke publicly, while others chose to remain anonymous. These statements were considered by the judge in determining the final sentence. Keith Wright remains in custody following his conviction. His case has been cited in media coverage that noted both his time in the NFL and the outcome of his legal proceedings. Number 2. Darren Sharper. Darren Sharper was a former professional football player who played as a safety for the Green Bay Packers, Minnesota Vikings, and New Orleans Saints. Over the course of his 14-year NFL career, he was selected to 5 Pro Bowls and was part of a Super Bowl winning team with the Saints. He retired in 2010 and was widely recognized at the time as one of the most accomplished defensive backs of his era. Between 2010 and 2014, Sharper was the subject of multiple criminal investigations in several U.S. states. According to court records and public statements from prosecutors, Sharper was accused of meeting women in social settings and providing them with drinks that contained prescription sedatives such as Zolpidem. Several individuals later reported experiencing memory loss and impairment and said they were assaulted while under the influence of those substances. Sharper was later charged and convicted in multiple jurisdictions in connection with these incidents. Reports involving Darren Sharper began to emerge from multiple jurisdictions, including Los Angeles, Tempe, Las Vegas, Miami, and New Orleans. In each case, individuals described similar circumstances involving the alleged use of prescription sedatives. The investigation was complicated by the fact that the incidents occurred in different states and were initially handled by separate local agencies. By early 2014, 2 police reports filed in Los Angeles within a short period helped authorities recognize a possible connection. Investigators reviewed Sharper's travel history, communication records, and forensic evidence, which began to link him to open cases in other regions. As the investigation progressed, additional reports were submitted, prompting the involvement of federal authorities. Evidence collected included surveillance video, text message exchanges, and toxicology findings indicating the presence of sedatives. A cooperating witness, identified in court records as an associate of Sharper, admitted to being involved and provided information as part of a plea agreement. In 2015, Sharper reached a multi-jurisdictional plea agreement involving cases in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Louisiana, as well as federal charges. He pleaded guilty or no contest to a combination of offenses, including drug distribution and related conspiracy charges. The coordinated plea allowed for a single sentencing process overseen by federal court. While the offenses carried the potential for a significantly longer sentence, the final agreement resulted in an 18-year federal prison term. During sentencing in 2016, several individuals involved in the case provided victim impact statements, which were submitted to the court as part of the official proceedings. The judge acknowledged the seriousness of the offenses and noted that Sharper had used his public status to gain the trust of those involved. The 18-year federal sentence, issued as part of a multi-jurisdictional plea agreement, received differing responses. Some advocacy organizations expressed concern that the sentence was not proportionate to the number of cases, while others viewed it as a necessary outcome to resolve multiple legal matters without requiring repeated court appearances by those involved. As of 2025, Darren Sharper remains incarcerated in a federal correctional facility, with his earliest possible release date still several years in the future. While federal inmates are not eligible for traditional parole, Sharper may earn limited sentence reductions through good conduct, but early release is not expected. The case has been referenced in broader discussions regarding athlete conduct and institutional responses. The NFL received public attention related to its handling of player conduct, including matters involving individuals no longer active in the league. The case also contributed to media conversations about the role of public status in legal accountability. Darren Sharper's case has been cited in discussions about how public status can affect legal accountability. Although once viewed as a potential Hall of Fame candidate, his eligibility was not pursued, and his name was removed from various team and league honors. Court records showed a pattern of similar offenses across multiple states, involving prescription sedatives. He continued to appear in public during the investigation. His conviction resulted from multiple coordinated cases and has been referenced in broader conversations about legal responsibility and the role of status in criminal proceedings. Number 3. Kellen Winslow II. Kellen Winslow II entered the National Football League as a highly regarded first-round draft pick in 2004, following an exceptional college career at the University of Miami. The son of Hall of Fame tight end Kellen Winslow Sr., he was known for his athletic ability and standout performances at the tight end position. During his NFL career, Winslow played for several teams, notably the Cleveland Browns, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, New England Patriots, New York Jets, and, briefly, the Seattle Seahawks. Winslow's legal troubles first became public when he was arrested for possession of synthetic marijuana, commonly known as spice. However, this case ended with a conditional discharge and no formal conviction was recorded. More serious allegations arose in 2018 when multiple women in Southern California reported incidents involving a suspect matching Winslow's description. These events occurred in public places, including residential neighborhoods and parking lots, prompting local authorities to launch a detailed investigation based on the similarities among the reports. Winslow was arrested in June 2018 in San Diego County and subsequently charged with multiple felonies related to assault and related offenses. During his 2019 trial, prosecutors focused on 5 primary incidents involving different victims. The prosecution presented substantial evidence, including witness testimonies, cell phone data, and surveillance footage. The defense team highlighted Winslow's mental health issues, emphasizing the potential effects of repeated head trauma from his football career, and raised concerns about behavioral changes resulting from neurological conditions. Despite this defense, the jury convicted Winslow on several charges but could not reach verdicts on others, leading to mistrials. In February 2021, Winslow entered into a plea agreement accepting responsibility for additional offenses to resolve the unresolved charges. Consequently, in March 2021, he received a sentence of 14 years in California State Prison, the maximum allowed under his plea deal. The sentencing judge emphasized the severity and repetitive nature of Winslow's conduct when issuing the sentence. As of 2025, Winslow remains incarcerated at the California Rehabilitation Center in Norco. He is not eligible for parole until September 2028. Winslow has twice attempted to have his sentence reduced under California Assembly Bill 124, citing brain trauma and childhood abuse as mitigating factors. Both petitions were denied, with the most recent denial occurring in January 2025. Winslow's case sparked significant public discourse regarding the intersection of athlete behavior, accountability, mental health, and the long-term impacts of repeated brain trauma. While advocacy groups have highlighted neurological conditions as a significant concern, legal experts and the courts have maintained the importance of personal responsibility. The National Football League refrained from extensive commentary on Winslow's case, but has since removed promotional references to him from league platforms. Today, Winslow's identity as a former professional athlete is largely overshadowed by his serious criminal convictions and ongoing incarceration. Number 4. Brandon Browner. Brandon was once a standout cornerback in the NFL, known for his physical playing style and imposing frame. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, he played a key role in the Seattle Seahawks' early 2000s defense, known as the Legion of Boom. He later joined the New England Patriots and won a Super Bowl there as well, becoming one of the few players in NFL history to earn championship rings with 2 different franchises in back-to-back seasons. But after leaving the league, Browner's life off the field took a troubling turn, one that led to a felony conviction and years in state prison. In July 2018, police in La Verne, California, responded to a 911 call about a disturbance at a private residence. According to the police report, Browner had unlawfully entered the home of a woman he had previously dated. He was accused of physically restraining her in the presence of her children, threatening her safety, and stealing personal items before leaving the scene. Officers described the incident as serious due to the involvement of minors and the prior history between the individuals. Browner was arrested shortly after and held without bail. Authorities gathered witness statements and physical evidence from the scene. Surveillance footage from nearby residences supported aspects of the account, and Browner's prior interactions with law enforcement added context to the investigation. In the months leading up to the incident, he had faced multiple arrests for unrelated offenses, including alleged domestic violations. Prosecutors stated that the 2018 incident was not isolated, but instead part of an ongoing pattern of concerning behavior. Given the severity of the allegations, the case progressed quickly. Browner was charged with several felonies, including attempted murder, burglary, false imprisonment, and 2 counts of child endangerment. In December 2018, he entered a no-contest plea to 1 count of attempted murder and 2 misdemeanor counts of child cruelty. The plea deal allowed him to avoid trial while still resulting in a conviction. He was sentenced to 8 years in a California state prison and received a 10-year restraining order prohibiting contact with the victims. After sentencing, Browner was processed by the California Department of Corrections. He was initially assigned to Wasco State Prison and later transferred to San Quentin, one of California's most secure and well-known correctional facilities. As of 2025, he remains in custody. Although he became eligible for parole in late 2023, state records indicate that he has not been released, and no future parole date has been confirmed. Outside of routine legal updates, Browner has remained out of the public spotlight. Media coverage of the case was widespread at the time of his arrest and sentencing. Reports shifted focus from his football achievements to his criminal record. Many former teammates and coaches declined to comment, and there was little public support following his conviction. The NFL made no official statement on the matter. Browner's case joined a growing list of high-profile former athletes facing serious legal consequences after their careers had ended. The situation also renewed conversations around the NFL's handling of off-field issues, particularly when it comes to retired players. While Browner was not an active player at the time of the incident, some analysts pointed to a larger concern: the lack of structured support for players adjusting to life after football. Discussions included the challenges some athletes face with long-term injuries, mental health concerns, and behavioral patterns that may not have been addressed during their playing careers. Brandon Browner's case stands as a reminder that athletic success does not guarantee stability beyond the game. Once recognized for his contributions on the field, he is now listed in public records as an incarcerated individual in the California prison system. For those affected by the 2018 incident, the outcome brought a legal resolution. But the impact, both on his legacy and on the people involved, remains lasting and significant. Number 5. Darrell Henley. Darrell Henley had the kind of football career many young athletes only dream about. As a standout cornerback at UCLA, he became known for his speed, agility, and sharp instincts on the field. In 1988, he earned All-American honors and caught the attention of NFL scouts. Just 1 year later, the Los Angeles Rams selected him in the 2nd round of the 1989 NFL Draft. It seemed like the beginning of a long and successful professional journey. During his time in the NFL, Henley built a reputation as a dependable player. He started in dozens of games and recorded multiple interceptions. Off the field, he kept a low profile and was even featured in promotional materials for the league, someone seen as a positive representative of the sport. But while the public saw a disciplined athlete, federal investigators would later uncover a much darker reality. Henley wasn't just a football player. He had become entangled in a criminal world that few could have imagined. In the early 1990s, federal law enforcement began tracking a multi-state cocaine distribution network that moved drugs from Texas to California. The investigation led them to several individuals with ties to professional sports. Eventually, Henley's name surfaced. He wasn't accused of casual involvement or low-level dealings. Evidence suggested he played a direct role in funding and facilitating parts of the operation. Authorities used wiretaps and cooperating witnesses to build their case. In December 1993, Henley was indicted on federal drug trafficking charges. The case shocked the sports world. While some athletes had faced legal trouble before, this was something altogether different. A federal indictment for cocaine distribution wasn't just a scandal, it carried the potential for decades in prison. In March 1995, Henley stood trial and was ultimately convicted of conspiracy to distribute cocaine, marking the beginning of his legal downfall. But the story didn't end there. It was about to take an even more disturbing turn. While Henley was in custody awaiting sentencing, federal agents uncovered a plot that stunned the courtroom and further escalated the case. Prosecutors revealed that Henley had attempted to orchestrate a murder-for-hire scheme from jail. His targets were two key figures in his legal proceedings: the federal judge overseeing his case and a former Rams cheerleader who had agreed to testify against him. According to court records, Henley used a smuggled cell phone and intermediaries on the outside to arrange the plan. He communicated using coded language, offering payment in exchange for the murders to be carried out before the sentencing. Fortunately, the plot was intercepted before it could be executed. Undercover agents posed as hitmen, recording the conversations and collecting hard evidence that directly linked Henley to the scheme. This second criminal act resulted in new charges. Henley eventually pleaded guilty to solicitation to commit murder, admitting to his involvement in the murder-for-hire conspiracy. In March 1997, he was sentenced to a total of 41 years in federal prison, comprising both the drug conviction and the murder plot. Under federal sentencing guidelines, he is required to serve at least 85% of that time before being eligible for release, placing his earliest possible release date well into the 2030s. The response from the NFL was swift and quiet. Henley was removed from all promotional materials, and the league distanced itself completely. His former team, the Rams, declined to make a public statement, and many of his teammates chose not to comment. In the court of public opinion, disbelief quickly turned into dismay. This was not a case of a misguided athlete making a single poor choice. It was a calculated series of decisions that crossed multiple legal and ethical boundaries. Henley's story became one of the most dramatic and unsettling falls from grace in NFL history. It prompted serious conversations about the influence of money, pressure, and secrecy in professional sports. How could someone who had everything, fame, opportunity, and talent, risk it all to become part of a criminal enterprise? And more shockingly, how could he go as far as attempting to eliminate the very people trying to uphold justice? As of 2025, Darrell Henley remains in federal custody. At one point, he was housed at the Federal Correctional Institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi, although his current location may have changed. Over the years, he has filed legal motions and appeals, but none have succeeded in reducing his sentence. His name is no longer mentioned in football discussions or highlight reels. The legacy he once began to build has been completely eclipsed by the gravity of his crimes. Number 6. Robert Rozier. Robert's path to infamy is one of the most unusual and unsettling stories to ever emerge from the world of professional sports. Once a promising defensive end drafted by the Saints. Louis Cardinals in 1979, Rozier's early career showed flashes of potential. He had played college ball at Cal and was known for his size and quickness. But his time in the NFL was brief, a single season, cut short by off-the-field issues and a growing sense that Rozier was searching for something far beyond football. After drifting away from the sport, he disappeared from the spotlight entirely. When his name resurfaced years later, it wasn't in a sports headline. It was in connection to a series of killings tied to a radical religious group based in Florida. By the mid-1980s, Rozier had joined a controversial organization known as the Nation of Yahweh, led by a self-proclaimed prophet named Yahweh ben Yahweh. The group gained national attention not just for its extreme beliefs, but for its increasingly violent actions. Authorities would later describe it as a cult, one that demanded total loyalty and sometimes violent obedience from its members. Rozier, who had adopted a new name within the group, became one of its most loyal followers. In court, he would later admit to killing at least 4 people at the group's direction, allegedly as part of initiation rituals, or to silence perceived enemies. The killings occurred across Florida and involved victims targeted specifically by the group's leadership. The FBI and local law enforcement launched a multi-year investigation into the Nation of Yahweh after several bodies were discovered bearing the hallmarks of ritualistic violence. Informants from within the group, including Rozier himself, began cooperating with federal agents. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Rozier turned witness against Yahweh ben Yahweh and other senior members, testifying in one of the most high-profile cult-related trials in U.S. history. His testimony was considered pivotal in securing convictions, though it also highlighted just how deeply he had been involved in the organization's most violent acts. Under a plea agreement, Rozier was convicted of multiple killings, but received a reduced sentence, serving about a decade in prison before being released on parole in the mid-1990s. What followed was a brief attempt at rebuilding his life under a new identity. But Rozier's return to society was short-lived. In the late 1990s, he was arrested in California for check fraud, having been caught using stolen checks and false identification in multiple transactions. Because of his previous convictions, the case qualified under California's 3 strikes law, a legal framework that mandates a life sentence for individuals convicted of 3 serious offenses. In 2001, Rozier was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, not for the killings he had once confessed to, but for repeated financial crimes that brought him back under the scrutiny of law enforcement. As of February 2025, Rozier remains incarcerated in California under his original birth name, Robert Rozier, and is listed in state records as inmate P99863. He is currently housed at Mule Creek State Prison and has been denied parole twice, once in 2022 and again in early 2025. While technically eligible for future review, both parole boards cited concerns over his past violent history, lack of sustained rehabilitation, and continued risk to the public. Rozier's story has become a chilling case study in how a person can fall so far from the structured discipline of professional sports into a world of extremism, violence, and fraud. For many who followed the case, the most troubling part wasn't just the crimes he committed, but the way he moved between different versions of himself: athlete, cult member, informant, paralee, and repeat offender. At each stage, Rozier seemed to reinvent himself without ever fully confronting the consequences of what came before. The broader impact of his case reached into legal and cultural arenas. His cooperation helped dismantle one of the most dangerous religious cults in the country, but it also raised ethical questions about plea deals offered to individuals involved in multiple killings. Critics of California's 3 strikes law pointed to Rozier's sentencing as both an example of the law's reach and its complexity. A man who had previously served a lenient sentence for homicide, now facing life in prison for financial fraud. Supporters of the law, however, viewed the outcome as a necessary consequence of repeated disregard for the law, regardless of the offense. Number 7. Anthony Wayne Smith. Anthony Wayne Smith was once seen as a rising force in professional football. Born in 1967 and raised in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, he stood out as a natural athlete early on. After a standout collegiate career at the University of Arizona, Smith was drafted in the first round of the 1990 NFL Draft by the Los Angeles Raiders, 11th overall. As a defensive end, he quickly became known for his explosive strength and his ability to pressure quarterbacks. Over the next several seasons, he recorded 57.5 career sacks across 98 games, cementing his place as one of the Raiders' most aggressive pass rushers during the early 1990s. Smith embraced the spotlight in Los Angeles. He was seen at high-profile events, enjoyed a celebrity lifestyle, and even appeared in commercials. But as his NFL career wound down in the mid-1990s, cracks began to show. After retiring from football, Smith seemed to fade from the public eye. What followed was a disturbing unraveling, one that would see the former star athlete tied to multiple violent crimes and, ultimately, convicted of 3 murders. The first case surfaced in 1999. A man named Kevin Smoot was found dead following what investigators believed was a failed business deal involving Smith. Reports suggested that Smoot had been lured to a location under the false promise of resolving a dispute, but was instead abducted and killed. The exact motive was unclear, but investigators pointed to financial disagreements. 2 years later, in 2001, another case emerged, this time involving 2 brothers, Kevin and Ricky Nettles. They were abducted from a Los Angeles car wash by men who reportedly claimed to be police officers. The brothers were forced into a vehicle and later found dead. Evidence suggested they had been held and subjected to severe physical abuse before their deaths. At the time, authorities treated the cases independently. Smith's name came up in both investigations, but there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. The cases eventually went cold. Years passed with little public mention of Smith, but in 2008, a man named Mauricio Ponce was killed in Antelope Valley, California, in what appeared to be another targeted act of violence. That case would become a turning point. In 2011, Smith was arrested and charged in connection with Ponce's murder. The investigation revealed that Ponce had reportedly been involved in a dispute with Smith, and prosecutors claimed the killing bore a striking resemblance to the earlier unsolved cases. With Smith now in custody, detectives re-examined the older files. Advances in forensic science, combined with new witness cooperation, helped piece together a pattern that linked Smith to the deaths of Smoot and the Nettles brothers. Prosecutors alleged that in each case, the victims were deceived, abducted, and then killed following personal or financial conflicts with Smith. What made the allegations even more troubling was the calculated nature of the acts and the long time span over which they occurred. In 2012, Smith was charged with 4 counts of murder. The trial began in Los Angeles in 2015 and immediately drew national attention. It was rare for a former professional athlete, especially one with Smith's visibility, to stand trial for multiple homicides. The prosecution presented testimony from law enforcement officials, forensic specialists, and several individuals who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of Smith's alleged involvement. The defense maintained that Smith had no part in the killings and questioned the reliability of witnesses, some of whom had criminal backgrounds of their own. In November 2015, the jury reached a verdict. Smith was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder in the killings of Kevin Smoot and the Nettles brothers. He was acquitted in the 2008 murder of Mauricio Ponce, with the jury citing insufficient evidence to convict on that charge. In January 2016, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. It was one of the most severe punishments handed down to a former NFL player. Smith displayed little visible emotion during sentencing. His legal team declined to make statements to the press, and Smith himself has not spoken publicly about the case since. As of 2025, he remains in custody within the California Department of Corrections, serving out what will be the rest of his life behind bars. The public response was marked by a combination of shock, sadness, and reflection. Smith had once been a public figure in Los Angeles, admired for his athleticism and presence both on and off the field. His fall from grace challenged assumptions about athletes, and raised difficult questions about what happens after the stadium lights go dark. The NFL made no official comment on Smith's conviction, and his presence was gradually erased from league promotional materials and Raiders history. Fans who remembered cheering for him on Sundays now found themselves grappling with an unsettling reality: that the person they saw on the field may have been leading a very different life away from it. Smith's case has since prompted broader conversations about life after professional sports. Some questioned whether unresolved mental health issues, the psychological toll of high-impact play, or post-career financial pressures may have contributed to his downward spiral. Others pointed to the weight of personal responsibility, viewing his actions as calculated and unforgivable, regardless of background or circumstances. Ultimately, Anthony Wayne Smith's legacy is no longer written in highlight reels or record books. It is remembered instead for the lives lost, the years of unresolved violence, and the long path to justice. His story serves as a powerful example of how fame and success can conceal deeper struggles, and how choices made in the shadows can permanently redefine a life once lived in the public eye. Number 8. Eric Naposki. Eric Naposki's football career never reached household name status, but for a time, he was on the edge of making it big. A former linebacker who spent time on the New England Patriots practice squad and later played in the World League of American Football, he was known for his toughness and ambition. Even after stepping away from professional sports, Naposki managed to stay in the spotlight, working security at upscale nightclubs in Southern California. That's where he crossed paths with Nanette Johnston, a woman whose life would soon become closely intertwined with his, and whose connection to a wealthy older man would lead both of them into one of California's most talked about cold cases. The crime took place in 1994, when multimillionaire businessman Bill McLaughlin was found fatally shot in his Newport Beach home. There were no signs of forced entry, and the crime scene offered few immediate clues. McLaughlin had been in a relationship with Johnston, who was significantly younger and had moved into his home with her 2 children. She had access to his finances and stood to benefit from several life insurance policies. But while authorities questioned her early on, there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges, and the case went cold for over a decade. Years later, detectives revisited the case with fresh eyes. They began to re-interview witnesses and re-examine old evidence, including phone records and handwritten notes that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. One of the leads brought them back to Naposki, who had been romantically involved with Johnston at the time of McLaughlin's death. Prosecutors alleged that the two had conspired to eliminate McLaughlin in order to gain access to his wealth. Though the murder weapon was never recovered, circumstantial evidence began to mount. Witnesses placed Naposki near the scene that night, and inconsistencies in his account of events raised more red flags. In 2009, 15 years after the killing, Naposki was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Johnston was arrested shortly after. Prosecutors built their case around the financial motive, pointing out that Johnston had written herself checks from McLaughlin's accounts shortly after his death, and argued that Naposki was the one who carried out the killing, acting on a plan they had discussed in secret. The trial didn't begin until 2011, and when it did, it became one of the most closely watched proceedings in Orange County. The courtroom heard testimony about hidden relationships, bank accounts, and shifting alibis. The defense insisted that the case was built on speculation, with no physical evidence tying Naposki directly to the crime. But the jury disagreed. In 2012, Eric Naposki was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that left no room for appeal based on parole eligibility. Johnston was tried separately and also received a life sentence. Both maintained their innocence, with Naposki later suggesting he was the victim of flawed police work and a wrongful conviction. Despite those claims, the verdict has stood, and as of 2025, Naposki remains incarcerated in the California state prison system. He is not eligible for release and is serving a sentence that ensures he will remain behind bars for life. The public reaction to the case reflected its dramatic, almost cinematic qualities. A love triangle, a fortune, and a murder that went unsolved for years before finally leading to convictions. Media outlets closely followed the trial, and true crime shows later featured the case as an example of how long-dormant investigations can still result in justice, even decades later. For many who watched it unfold, the story wasn't just about a crime. It was about manipulation, ambition, and the dark side of relationships built on hidden agendas. What made the case especially notable in the sports world was how far Naposki had drifted from his original image. He had once worn an NFL jersey, practiced alongside professional athletes, and lived a life of discipline and performance. But off the field, he had become entangled in a lifestyle that blurred the line between opportunity and danger. His association with Johnston, combined with financial instability and personal secrecy, created a volatile combination that, according to prosecutors, ended in a carefully planned act of violence. Today, Eric Naposki's name no longer surfaces in conversations about football. Instead, it remains etched into the record of a case that took nearly 2 decades to close, a reminder that time doesn't erase truth, and that even years later, justice can still find its way forward. Number 9. Earl Tony Joyner. Earl Tony Joyner was once a rising star in college football, known not just for his talent, but for his leadership on the field. As a safety for the Florida Gators, he served as team captain during the 2007 season and was part of a powerhouse program that consistently ranked among the nation's best. Teammates and coaches spoke highly of his instincts and presence, and for a while, it seemed like Joyner was destined for a promising future. But after college, his life took a different path, one that drifted further and further from the discipline and structure of the sport he once led. By the time he reached his 30s, he was no longer celebrated for athletic achievement. Instead, his name became tied to a case that had haunted investigators for years. In February 2016, Joyner's girlfriend, Hazel Obando, was found deceased in her Fort Myers apartment. The scene raised immediate concerns. There were no signs of forced entry, but investigators noted suspicious circumstances that pointed away from an accident or natural causes. Obando's death was initially ruled suspicious, but unresolved, and the case remained open for years as law enforcement struggled to build a solid case. During that time, Joyner was never formally charged, but he was not removed from suspicion either. Detectives quietly continued to collect evidence and monitor statements as they waited for a break that could turn speculation into charges. That break came several years later. Through a combination of newly reviewed evidence, witness interviews, and cell phone data analysis, authorities began to piece together a timeline that placed Joyner at the scene during a critical window. They also revisited earlier statements and uncovered inconsistencies in what he had told investigators shortly after Obando's death. In 2019, more than 3 years after the initial investigation began, Joyner was arrested in connection with the case and charged with second-degree murder. The arrest marked a turning point, not just in the case itself, but in the narrative surrounding a man who had once been seen as a role model on campus. The legal process moved slowly but deliberately. Joyner initially pleaded not guilty and maintained his innocence through early hearings. But by 2023, after years of court delays, evidence review, and negotiation, he agreed to change his plea. He entered a no-contest plea to second-degree murder, a legal move that avoided a full trial while still resulting in a conviction. The plea acknowledged the state's evidence without a direct admission of guilt, a resolution often used in cases where prosecutors seek certainty and the defense aims to limit potential sentencing exposure. In exchange, Joyner received a 25-year prison sentence, the standard penalty for the charge in Florida. As of 2025, Earl Tony Joyner remains in the custody of Florida's Department of Corrections. Now in his late 30s, he will not be eligible for release until well into the 2040s. He is serving his sentence in a state facility, far from the stadiums where he once played under the lights and wore the captain's armband. His case didn't generate the national headlines that some other former athletes' cases did. But within the Florida community, especially among those who remembered his college career, it sent a quiet shockwave. The idea that someone once so central to a celebrated team could later be tied to such a tragic act left many questioning what had gone wrong in the years after football. Public reaction to the case was somber and subdued. There were no viral moments or televised court clips, just a slow, steady realization that the promise of a bright future had turned into something much darker. The University of Florida made no official comment, and his name was quietly removed from recent athletic honors. For those close to Obando, the resolution brought a sense of closure, though it came after years of silence and uncertainty. The sentence may have marked the legal end, but the emotional toll left behind is harder to measure. Joyner's story isn't just about crime or punishment. It's about the slow unraveling of someone who once had structure, respect, and opportunity, and the irreversible impact of choices made behind closed doors. From team captain to inmate, the shift in identity was stark. And for those who followed the case, it serves as yet another reminder that athletic talent, no matter how promising, doesn't protect anyone from the consequences of real-life decisions. Number 10. Michael Gibson. Michael Gibson was once a promising young athlete at Florida State University, where he played as a running back during the early 1990s. He was fast, strong, and carried the kind of potential that made college coaches take notice. Florida State University was a powerhouse football program, producing star after star, and Gibson seemed poised to be part of that legacy. But off the field, his life would take a drastic and violent turn, one that ended any hopes of a future in sports and left behind a legacy not of achievement, but of irreversible harm. In 1993, Gibson became the subject of a criminal investigation after a violent attack that left a woman seriously injured and traumatized. According to court records, Gibson forced his way into her home, assaulted her, and then shot her before fleeing with stolen property. The woman survived, and her account of the events was critical to the case. She gave a detailed description to authorities, and forensic evidence collected from the scene helped build a strong case against Gibson. When police arrested him, they recovered items linked to the robbery and matched ballistics to the weapon used during the attack. Prosecutors moved quickly, filing multiple felony charges against Gibson that included attempted felony murder, armed burglary, and multiple counts of forced assault. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic reports, eyewitness testimony, and items found in Gibson's possession all pointed to premeditation and deliberate violence. During the trial in 1994, the prosecution presented a clear timeline of events and emphasized the extreme nature of the crime. The victim's survival and testimony added significant weight to the state's case, leading to a swift conviction. The sentence handed down was among the harshest in Florida's criminal court history for a single defendant in a non-capital case. Gibson received 4 life terms for the assault charges, another life sentence for armed burglary, and a 6th for attempted felony murder. In addition to those 6 life sentences, the judge imposed several decades of additional time for related charges. Under Florida law, life sentences carry no guarantee of parole, and the structure of his sentencing meant that Gibson would remain behind bars permanently. As of 2025, Michael Gibson is still incarcerated in Florida, serving his time across multiple life sentences. He remains one of the most high-profile examples of a college athlete whose career was completely derailed by violent crime. Unlike other cases where former athletes committed crimes later in life, Gibson's downfall came at the very start of his adult life, while he was still enrolled in school and playing for a top-tier football program. The contrast between his potential and his actions was stark. A young man who could have had a future in the NFL instead left behind a trail of devastation and was removed from society entirely. The reaction to his case at the time was swift. Florida State University cut ties with him immediately, and he was removed from all team records and media guides. Coaches and players expressed shock and disappointment, and the local community was shaken by the brutality of the case. Over the years, his name has faded from public conversation, but for those who followed college football in the early 90s, the story still resonates as one of the most disturbing scandals involving a student athlete. There has never been a serious appeal or reversal of Gibson's sentence. Legal efforts on his behalf have failed, and he has remained in custody without incident, largely removed from the public eye. His case is occasionally referenced in discussions around crime and sentencing laws in Florida, particularly when it comes to life terms and parole eligibility. But beyond that, his story serves more as a warning than a point of debate, a reminder of how a single violent act can end not just one future, but irreparably alter the lives of everyone involved. Michael Gibson's story closes this list with a reminder of how fragile promise can be. He had the athleticism, the opportunity, and the backing of one of the best programs in the country. But in one night, everything changed, and the consequences will follow him for the rest of his life. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when a new case drops. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and which story stood out the most. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.